This is a book about film noir. Hello fellow earthlings, it's Libs, and today I'm going to be sharing all the books I read throughout summer, recently, something like that. This would be a video where I talk about all my summer reads, but I read exactly one book in December, so I'll mention it, but it's mainly going to be the books I've read so far this year. Pretty much every book I've read recently has been like a 4 or a 4 or a 4.5. It's one of those days, isn't it? But I haven't read any 5 stars, so I'm not sure if I'm just being particularly picky at the moment, or if I'm just really close to figuring out exactly which books I really love, but I haven't quite got there yet. So the one book I read in December was Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay, which is an essay collection that she published 2013?
5 minutes later.
14. I was pretty close. This ended up being in my favourite books of 2020 video, so if you want to know a bit more about it, I'll link that somewhere. But I really enjoyed this collection. I think when you're reading it, you can definitely tell which time period everything's happening in. Don't really know what else to say about it. It's been a long time since I read this. But I enjoyed it. I'd recommend it. I think it's useful if you're someone who's like very interested in media and studying media. I think this is a great book. If you're not, it might not be for you. I know there are some pretty mixed feelings about this book, but I enjoyed it. So the first book I read this year was Frenchman's Creek by Daphne Damore, and I have this gorgeous hardback edition. I would really like to collect all the Daphne Damores in this edition, just because I think they're really cool and unique, and you know, you can't accidentally destroy the thing. Wow, that's helpful. Okay, forget that. I gave this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It was written in the 40s, early 40s, I think, and it's a historical fiction about pirates. It's kind of like a romance novel, but not really. It's got a lot more depth to it than perhaps a lot of like those kinds of piratey romances that you're probably thinking of. It focuses a lot on how society views like women during this time period, and how the heroine kind of relates to the pirate, because they're both kind of adventurous sort of outcasts, and how they don't really fit into the mainstream society. So I found that really, really interesting. I enjoyed it. It's not too complicated to read. I think, you know, a lot of classics can, or like modern classics can sometimes be a bit hard to wrap your head around, but this was very accessible. If you haven't read any Daphne Damore, I think this is a really good starting point. I know it's very different from anything else that she's written, but I enjoyed it. And you know, there are a few bits where it perhaps hasn't aged particularly well, but nothing too egregious. And I enjoyed it. I actually think for once the introduction was really cool too in this one, which can't say for a lot of books. Okay, next is the book that's probably my favourite that I've read so far this year, and that is Sorcerer by Madeline Miller. This is definitely a 4.5 for me. This is a story that you've probably all heard about by now. And it was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2019. This is the story of the nymph half goddess Circe, who you might know from a few Greek myths, who does something kind of bad at the start of the book and is banished to an island where she hones her witchcraft and has many sort of minor adventures with the different beings and people who at some point end up on her island. I really enjoyed this. It's quite a slow-paced book, but it never got like dragged or felt boring in any parts. I really enjoyed it. I can't even tell you why this isn't a 5-star, because my brain says it probably should be, but there was just something that I can't even articulate that makes it not quite 5 stars for me. But I would highly recommend this book. I really enjoyed it. Next we come to what is probably my least favourite book that I've read so far this year, and that is Sorcerer to the Crown by Zen Cho. It's got a beautiful cover. I mean, it's amazing. And I'm fairly certain this was like in my 5-star reading predictions video, which is a bit depressing, but oh well. I bought this book like years ago, so it probably isn't, looking at like the blurb, I can probably tell that it wasn't quite gonna be my cup of tea. Now, it probably was back then if I just read it at the right time. So this is a story of England in the Regency era England, and there's this guy who's like the Sorcerer Royale, and like magic is slowly disappearing from England, and like women aren't allowed to practice sorcery, that's a no-no. And then he realizes that, oh, but women don't, you know, fall apart using magic, so I should help them.
I don't know.
It's weird. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. The names of a lot of it just bothered me. It was very like just trying super hard to be like accessible fantasy, if that makes any sense. I don't know, I did not really like this. It felt like it was trying really hard to make all these points, but none of them really landed, and like it was just impossible to connect to any of the characters really. It wasn't my cup of tea. I think this is like a 2.5 star for me. Next was one of the books that I read for the Buzzword Reading Challenge. I can't even remember what the challenge was for January, but anyway, I read A Midsummer Night's Dream, which is one of my favourite Shakespeare plays, probably my favourite Shakespeare play, 4 stars. I did listen to it instead of reading this because this edition is absolutely minute and trying to read it is just very difficult. So I don't know why I've bought so many of these editions every time I've ever been to London, but I have. So yay. They're nice decorative pieces, but they're not realistic for reading unless you have amazing eyesight, because it is just minute and I got a headache reading it. But I love this Shakespeare play. It's weird, it's wacky. Nothing really makes sense, but that is half the fun of it. I definitely recommend watching. I know there's like a few versions on YouTube that you can watch, and it's great. It's weird, it's great, I love it. Then I read The Princess Bride by William Goldman, which was of course the inspiration for one of my favourite films of all time. I enjoyed a lot of this. I think I gave this 4 stars. The bits that were the most like the film were the bits I loved the most.
Inconceivable.
And normally I would always say like the book is better than the film, but I think in this case the film is better than the book.
Inconceivable!
I think it's just that I'd say like mainly the first 300 pages are kind of like the film, and then the final 100 pages are just not. I don't know, it's like a book within a book with author notes within the book, if that makes sense. You know, you've got this guy who's an author and he decides he's going to make an abridged version of his favourite childhood book because he's realised that When his father read it to him when he was ill as a child, he left out huge chunks of the book because they were boring and made no sense for a children's adventure story. So he decides that's what he's going to do. But the author's kind of sucks a little bit. Like, I don't really like the author very much. So his bits are kind of the worst bits of the book. And again, it was written in the 70s, I think. So there's a few bits that haven't aged well. And they're all mainly in, like, his sections, not, like, the Princess Bride sections. Then you get, like, a lot. But I, like, enjoyed the actual Princess Bride bits. And quite a lot of the, like, notes that were written into the book are quite funny and entertaining. There'll be bits where it will just stop in the middle of a paragraph and be like, I'm going to skip the next 10 pages because they're just about hats or something like that. And I kind of just enjoyed that. There were just moments where he could do that and it was great. So I gave it 4 stars. I enjoyed it. I think if you love the film, you might enjoy this, but I don't know. The film is so special that the book was never going to be able to live up to it. Then I read The Vanishing Half by Bennett. Finally read this book. I think I bought it as soon as it was released in Australia, but I still didn't read it immediately, which was very silly. I gave this a 4.5 as well. I really, really loved it. There were just a couple things that, didn't make it a 5. So this is a story of 2 sisters from this town where everyone is white passing. And when they're 16, the 2 twins decide they're going to run away from home to New Orleans. And then after a year or 2, one of the twins completely vanishes. And no one knows what happens to her. And it's the story of how these twins' lives are completely different based on, like, the decisions that they made and how they decided they were going to live their lives and who they married, and about their daughters as well, and how their daughters one day kind of end up running in the same circle, and how that kind of just alters their sense of self and their lives and the things that they'd told their children, things that were true and not true. It jumps around with time a lot, and there were moments when that really worked, and there were moments where I kind of didn't realise where we were supposed to be. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I know there are some people who felt like the ending was quite unfinished. I thought that it was quite realistic, but I could definitely see why some people would have that criticism. I really enjoyed it, though. I think there were a lot of interesting topics that it brought up that I hadn't really considered before, and I thought this was great. I would definitely recommend it. There's a reason everyone has been talking about this book for the past, like, 6 months, and it is fantastic. I definitely recommend it. Next, we have another book that I read for the Buzzword Reading Challenge. This one was for February, which the task was to read a book with a colour in the title, and for that I read The Little White Horse by Elizabeth Googe. This is a children's novel that was written in or published in the 40s. Yeah, in 46. I remember when I got this book, I was probably 9 years old, on holiday somewhere, and they had this at the newsagent at some little beach town somewhere in WA. And my mum bought this for me because I think she was buying a whole heap of, like, birthday cards or something, and I found the book section, and yay. And I really enjoyed this book as a kid. As an adult, I can pick it apart so much. I think this is probably more a 3-star for me because there's just a few issues in it, and a lot of these issues just come from the fact that it's a book that was written in the 40s, that was, again, historical fiction, sometime in the 1800s. It has that same issue as The Sorcerer to the Crown had, where the names are just, like, they're just ridiculous. And it just kind of pulls you out of it because, yeah, they're just Some of the names are ridiculous. And some of like the terms are things that we probably wouldn't be using today, which also kind of disrupts the reading flow a little bit. It's the story of a 13-year-old orphan girl who goes to live with her second cousin at the big family estate in England that for some reason she'd never been to before. And her immediately falling in love with this place, but it's a little bit mysterious and there's all these things going on that she wants to fix and understand. And I mean, it's a cute premise. I like the premise. There's just a few bits in the execution that aren't brilliant. And some bits that, yeah, as an adult reading it, make you question it. Particularly the like the minister in this book kind of scared me. It didn't scare me as a child, but as an adult reading it, I'm just like, you can't, like, are you really telling a 13-year-old girl that she's vain and that curiosity is a bad thing in a woman? Like, what? What? Like, all she did was, like, slightly, like, stroke some of her fabric during your service because it felt nice. I mean, that's... what? I didn't really get on with this the same as I did as a kid. But you know what? It's kind of like a cutish children's novel. I mean, it is what it is. It's fine. It's just probably not what I remember it being. So was it the only thing I remembered going into this again was her getting in a fight with the guy, and he's all like, oh no, you can't marry anyone except me. And I'm like, dude, she's 13 and you're like 15. None of you getting married. What are you doing? I don't know, there's some bits that have not aged well in this book. The final book is one that I've been reading for the past 2 months for uni, and that is film noir. And this is quite heavy to... Yay! Oh, that's fun. This is a book about film noir. So like, I'd say the first half, really, or third half, is kind of going into some of the history of film noir, some of like the terms and tropes, which I found very useful because I was doing a major essay for uni on film noir, and so I found that a really, really helpful resource just for like some of the basics, because sometimes some of like the more academic books sometimes like skip over it, and when you try and write an essay and source stuff, having somewhere where you can get like a lot of the simple things just written somewhere is really, really helpful. It also has its top 50 picks for noir classics from 1940 to 1960, so you get the posters in here, or photos of the posters. I'll try and find one. And so it will give you, like, in this case we got The Big Sleep, and it has like all that, some of the information there, and then it will have like 2 or 3 pages giving some behind the scenes like details and some of the history and inspiration for the film. So it's one that I think if you are a film student, this could be really, really useful. Also in like the first half, when it's just talking about the history, it references plenty of other films, so you're not just getting like the 50 best ones in here, also getting references to like at least another 50 throughout the book, which I found really, really useful. And yeah, if you're interested in film noir, I think this is a great resource. I don't know how I would rank it, maybe 4, because like I know there are obviously better resources than this one, but I think even as like a coffee table book, this is amazing. And I've just been flicking through it so much, and yeah, I think I've read most of it at this point, but going around the place trying to find the bits that were relevant for my assignment. But this is great. I love this. I'm so glad I have this. And this was also one of the cheaper books on noir that I could find, because a lot of them are really expensive. And I didn't quite want to do it. So This is great. So it's all the books that I have read recently. Huh. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you've read any of these books, let me know your thoughts on them in the comments below, and I will see you next time. Bye.